Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev and all these other websites you see over here on the side. Okay, and today what I want to do is talk about continuing on our whole like intro to Express. Talk about just sort of one of the sort of different approaches you can take to, hey, I want to deliver a website using an Express server. Okay, because again, all a server is just a box, a piece of software you write that intends on receiving requests from the outside and delivers the response that you ask it to deliver. So the simplest thing you can do is create what's called a static file server. What it just means is that it doesn't really do anything other than take an HTML file, give it to the client. Take a CSS file, deliver it to the client. If you ever use like Netlify or Vercel or GitHub Pages, or render.com to like render like a very basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript website where you're just basically uploading a bundle of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's essentially what they're doing. This is that you're using their server, and their server is statically delivering your files, meaning someone goes to the URL, they just deliver your index.html and so forth. But why can't we do it ourselves and create our own server? So let's show you how to do that. So let's go back to our Express project. Okay, so again, just to kind of recap. Okay, so let's get a little frozen. Oh, that's because I have that open. Okay, so bottom line is we imported Express because we had to import our library. We created our application object, and then at that point we could register middleware, again, intermediate steps with the .use function, and then we could register routes with like .get, .post, whatever. And again, when we do a .get, it took two arguments, the URL that get handles, and then the function that happens whenever that is requested. So it's essentially like events in the browser. It's just saying, instead of it being a click event, it's a get request to this URL. And when that pairing happens, we're going to run this function. Okay, and basically all these callbacks that we pass to use and get, they always receive the request and response object. The request object being the object that represents all the data of the requests that our server received, and then response being an object with functions like send that allow us to send a response back. Okay. Now, luckily, when it comes to doing a static file server, that functionality is pretty much already built into Express. So like if you wanted to do a static file server, we don't need to write a whole bunch of custom responses. We could, but we don't really need to. Okay, but actually let's first show you what it would look like if you did want to do kind of like your own specific file responses. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file, a folder I mean, and I'm going to create it in my project. So let's create a new folder here in the project, and we'll call this static, meaning for static files. Okay, and here we'll create a new file called index.html. Okay, and it's just going to have an h1 saying you see the /static /index.html file. Okay, that's all it's going to say. So let's say I wanted to create a URL for that just to get like deliver that file. Like that's literally all it does. And what I could do is I could make a route and say like app.get, and we'll say it's, we'll just say like static file will be the URL, and then we make our function request response. Okay, we'll fill in that function in a second. Let me just put here deliver a single static file. So how we would do that. Okay, so in that case, what I could do is I would use in response, there's a function called send file. Okay, so that just means the response isn't text, it's whatever the contents of X file is. Okay, and then we would just specify what file is. So I would say dot because it's starting, you always have to start from the folder that you're in. So starting from the folder that we're in, you need to go inside of a static folder. And inside of that folder, there's a file called index.html. So whenever I hit this route, the idea being, okay, is that send this file. That's literally all I'm doing. Okay, so that's that route. So again, and then again, this is the thing that turns on the server at the end. This is okay, listen, start this program, like have this application listen on port 3000 on our computer. So let me run that. Oops. npm run start. And one thing about specifically the start script, only works for the start script, is that for start, you don't have to do run. So I could do npm start. That goes for any project, but the start script's the only one that does that. Like for anything else, like if I did my own, like a script called cheese, it would have to be npm run cheese or npm run dev. Start's the only one where you can actually like not have to write the word run. So I could do npm start, it'll run the start script, and see my server. Oh wait, did I erase the app.listen? I think I did. Oops. There we go. Put that back there. Okay, there we go. So the server is listening on port 3000. See, that's why it's good to have that little message, because if I don't see that message, then I know something's wrong. Okay, that tells me, okay, the server started. Yay. Okay, so now let's go back over here and let's try that out. So if I go to localhost, again, localhost represents my computer. So localhost is just another word for my computer. And then I go to port 3000, and then we said /static file, I think is what we called it. Like, let's see what the route is, /static file. Yep. Path must be absolute or specify root to res.send file. Oh, boo. Okay, so that means we have you can't just send like this relative file. I have to send the root directory, which I'm trying to remember exactly how I do that. Well, here's what I can do. To keep it simple, I can actually, the cool thing about VS Code is I can actually right click on a file, the index.html, and I can copy the path. That actually tells you exactly where the file is. So if I copy that, I can go in here and paste it. And then there's the file path. Let me just get rid of this little extra piece here. Okay, generally you rather not do it that way. Like there's some functions built into JavaScript to get the root path. So that way when you deploy it to another computer, it gets the relative root path from that computer. So that way you don't have to constantly change your code every time you bring it to a different computer. But for our purposes today, I'm going to do that just to show you how this works. So now let me refresh this, and see I get the HTML file. But you can see like that's not the best way to do things. Like one, having to do like absolute paths, not very convenient, and it's only serving one file. So again, point being, you can create individual routes for individual files if you really wanted to, and say, hey, whenever someone sends a GET request to this URL, send them the contents of this file. I can do that, but generally the better way is to actually set up a static file server, which is going to handle it relatively. So I'm going to comment this out. Actually, I'll just leave it there. So generally you'd want to do this before all your routes. Okay, generally you always want to handle all your middleware before your routes. So what happens is that Express actually has a built-in middleware, has several different built-in middlewares. And instead of us just like creating our own custom middleware like this, we could actually have middleware that's already built in. And one of those is the static middleware. Okay, so we'll say that if anyone ever goes to a URL that starts with /static, so literally any URL that starts with /static, okay, which the way it should be handled is using the express.static middleware. Okay, so this is actually middleware, so instead of me having to write my own function, this is going to create the function that I need. All you have to do is specify what folder is a static folder. Okay, so in that case, this folder static will be my static folder. A lot of people do a folder called public. You can literally call it whatever you want, but I'm going to say, hey, whenever you go to a URL that starts with /static, that is the static. Look in this folder for what to deliver. Okay, so now let me start my server, and you might notice that this is getting annoying having to restart my server every time. And again, the way I stop my server is I do Control-C, but it's probably annoying to have to stop the server and restart the server every time I do that. So what if I don't want to do that? What you can do is you can install a tool called Notamon. So you would do npm install -g Notamon. Generally, if you're on Linux, you might have to give it sudo privileges to do global installs. That's what that -g means. It means to install this globally. You generally don't want to install things globally except for a few certain sort of like utility tools. Like Notamon's one of the few things you would install globally, which means like it's just available across your whole computer. You don't have to install it for every individual project. Usually you prefer to install it for every individual project. Why? Because you want it to be listed in the package.json. That's how other computers you deploy to, like if you deploy to Render or some other service, that's how it knows what libraries it has to download. So if you download it globally, it won't add it here. Okay. So, but if I do this command here, sudo npm install -g notamon, that's going to globally install notamon, although I typed in sudo wrong. And again, that might be a little bit different for Windows users, but for Mac or Linux users, that should be the command. Okay, and then you put in your computer password to give it those privileges, and then it'll install notamon, except I typed in my password wrong. There we go. But I should already have notamon installed, so it shouldn't take too long. Okay, and what notamon does is that when I type in notamon space, then the file name, what it's going to do is that it runs the file, and you see all this like output over here. It's saying it's watching, right? It's saying it's watching. What that means is that anytime I update a file in this folder, like anytime I update a file that ends in JavaScript, MJS, or JSON, anytime it sees a file of those types updated, it's going to restart the program. So I don't have to can't stop it and restart it myself. Notamon will do it for me. Okay. So in that case, now I don't have to like keep restarting the server. So usually what I'll do here at this point is I'm going to go back to my package.json and I'm going to create another script called dev, and that'll be notamon server.js. So that way, instead of me having to type in notamon every time, I can just do npm run dev, and that'll run that command for me. So the beauty of like this whole scripts feature. Okay, so wonderful. So let's just test that out. So let me stop my server, type in npm run dev, and there you go. So you see it started with notamon. Okay, I can see those notamon logs on my terminal. Wonderful. Okay, so now I don't have to keep restarting it every time. So now if I go to /static, see, I get the same file. The reason being is that when I go to /static, let's take a look at my code. What's going to happen is that it's going to be like, oh, okay, that URL starts with /static. Oh, you want me to treat it like a static URL. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to go look in the static folder. Now, generally, I didn't specify a file name, right? So I didn't specify like a file name at the end of the URL. So the way static file servers work is that if you don't specify a file name, just like a folder, it's always going to default to the index.html file in that folder. But what if I had an HTML file, let's say a new file called like cat.html, h1 cat, okay, well then you actually have to put the file name in there. So then I would put cat.html at the end, and I get the cat file. Okay, so bottom line is like index.html is the only file where you don't actually have to put the file name in there. So and same thing for like CSS files. So if I added like a CSS file in here, styles.css with, you know, let's say an h1 rule, h1 red, color equals red. Okay, then what would happen is that if I typed in styles.css, see, I get the CSS file. Okay, so bottom line, it's always based on whenever I hit the static routes, I don't have to make a route for each individual file because the static middleware sets up all the rules for me. Basically what it does, it just says, okay, look in the folder for a name that matches the URL. And if it doesn't find the file, like let's say I don't have a file called cheese.html. So if I type in like cheese.html, see, I'm going to get this because there was just no file that satisfied that route. And then basically what happens is that once this route or this middleware can't find a satisfactory file, it goes forward, and none of these other routes handle that particular URL pattern. So then I get that cannot get or cannot whatever. So that cannot means that means none of the rules that I have, none of these things that I've registered with my application can handle that specific request. It's kind of like if I go to a Italian restaurant and order sushi, they're going to be like, I cannot get you that sushi. Why? Because it's not on the menu. Okay, so you got to think of all these routes, all these like app.gets, app.uses. It's like you're building a menu in a restaurant, and anytime you order something that's not on the menu, this is the order that you're going to get. Oh, that's the response you'll get. Okay, so that hopefully like clarifies that a little bit. But essentially, that's how static file serving works. Okay, and again, if you had folders in there, so if like I did a folder in here, I did a cheese, and then inside that cheese file, I created a new file called index.html and then said h1 cheese. Okay, watch what happens. I can go to static slash cheese, and notice I'm not putting a found extension there because it's a folder, and I get the index.html that's in that folder. So that's always sort of the pattern. So I'll see you guys in the next video. We'll talk more about delivering dynamically. So instead of just delivering static HTML and CSS and JavaScript, how can I dynamically generate HTML on the fly using a technique called templating? I'll see you all in the next video.